guests, and staff. Please sign in. Mr. Diedrich, would you sign in? And
His isn't even showing that it's on.
Emily's excused. Ann Machewski is not here?
No, I didn't hear from her.
Okay, we didn't hear from her, okay. Okay, we got everybody? All right, we have no.
What's up on top? 18. That's
Oh, up there. 18, we have 18 present, 3 absent, and so we do have a majority and a quorum to continue on with our meeting. Please join me if you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have a motion by Supervisor Cleveland and a second by Supervisor Miller to approve the agenda. If there are no questions, please vote your ballot. We have 18 yes, 0 no, 0 abstain, and 3 absent, so that has been approved. I need a motion to approve the minutes, and I have a motion by Supervisor Diedrich and a second by Supervisor Elliott. Are there any questions regarding the minutes? If not, please vote your ballot. Okay, are there any, we have 18 yes, 0 nay, 0 absent, abstain, and now we have 2 absent, okay? So that has been approved. Are there any communications?
I have no communications.
Is there any public participation? None, okay. Then we'll move on to special business. And we have Bernie Sorenson, our emergency manager, will introduce the new volunteer emergency support team to the board.
Good evening. I'm your emergency manager for the county. I was looking around and I recognize most of you. There's a lot of new people though. That's just a lot of fun to know. I'm looking around and oh, sorry, is this not?
It should be on. Voice. It should be voice activated. Is it not?
It's always here.
Hello.
There you go.
Or am I just speaking already? Is it on? I'll speak louder either way. I was looking around and I see Supervisor Lloyd, he's part of my new LAPC, or part of my LAPC, and I haven't even met him yet. We sent a couple emails back and forth, so it's good to be here tonight. I'm not training tonight. I usually stand up here and try to train people or tell them something that might be useful, and this is useful actually, but it's different. I try to pretend, I'm trying to pretend these are like my employees, which I would love to have, because just take a guess. How many people know how many employees are in my division of park administration? I wish I had something to give you. I usually have a cookie or something, but or weather radio I can throw out. She wants a shirt. She wants a polo.
Yeah.
She said she didn't have a polo. But what we have here are some people that have dedicated a lot of time and effort for this county for many years, a lot longer than I have. I was just asking Brian Turkowitz here how long he's been with one or another volunteer group in this county that's responsible for emergency service type stuff. And Brian said about 20 years. It might be 21. This other gentleman that couldn't come tonight, that's sick, he's the same amount of time. So it's either been with a REACT team that's helped out mostly the sheriff's office and a lot of the municipalities for events and disaster events and accidents, different things, or the training that's associated with it. But both he and Nate have kind of started the local amateur radio group for this county, and they started the REACT team stuff, and Chad's kind of a new guy, but he's very motivated, and he can't wait to spend 20 years with our best team. The best team is the volunteer emergency support team. They are going to be concentrated mostly with me, emergency management, but Sheriff's Office will utilize them. They've all been trained in traffic control. They've had a number of, they probably got more command system training than any fire chief or police chief in the county. Chiefs, even. Some of them do. Actually, Nate, that's not here, he's a certified Wisconsin emergency manager, and it took Nate, that's not here, has that. So I guess the purpose is to tell you that, even though I'd love to have 4 additional employees in emergency management, the second best option is 1. Third best option, I don't know, I would put these guys probably at 1 or 2. And the reason I say that is because they're cheap. They are very dedicated to what they do. You don't have to pay them. They'll come at any time if they are available, and they will help me, whether it's damage assessment, running them, if we ever have to activate our emergency operations center, they're always available for the training. Sometimes, as you know, and all of you have been employed or employees now somewhere, you get an employee in, you're hoping for the best employee, you're hoping for employees who will go above and beyond. But sometimes you have those employees, unfortunately, that will say, it's not my job. And these guys, and hopefully gals someday, won't say that. They won't say it's not my job. Because sometimes I just need hands, right? So, Brian, Chad, Randy, and then Nate is the 4th one. We're starting small, but hopefully maybe next year, if I can expand it a few, we will. We did put in a budget, a small budget for them for reimbursing mileage if I need them in for whatever reason, for certain meeting expenses. We have them, they have their safety vests, they have different things that they have to do their job, but they're going to be what I need. I need hands, when I need them. I don't really have a good backup, so I'm training them as much as I can. That's all I wanted to say. Does anybody have any questions with this?
Supervisor Johnson.
I just wanted to say thank you for your service. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. And thank you for coming, and wish you well, and thank you for your service to the county. Okay, moving along, we have our administrator, Mr. Romenesko, and Kimberly Tenerelli, our corp counsel, who will provide some training for us on the chairs and vice chairs of committees.
We'll do this from our seats since we're going to co-train, and it's a little bit easier, I think, to hear us rather than that voice-activated microphone at the podium. So, even though this says chair and vice chair training, there is an element of the training tonight that is beneficial for everyone as a county board member. We'll cover some things about regular decorum within the committee meetings, as well as Kimberly will cover quite a bit of information regarding motions, the various motions, some of those a little bit more complex than others, public hearing, among other things. So it's for everyone, even though it specifies chair and vice chair. So for the agenda for tonight, we're going to cover the process, so a high-level explanation of the agenda and the process of open meetings all the way through to a vote. We'll cover duties of the chair, so responsibilities of the chair or vice chair, if needed, are more than just running the meeting or being in charge, but keeping the meeting on track. We'll talk a little bit about that, making sure the public is welcome to meetings. I know I've seen many of you as chairs or vice chairs welcome public or others that are wanting to provide information, welcome them and give them a space to make their comments. Making sure that points are made and ensure that your members of the committee are engaged and understand the topics and the actions before the committee. And for the purpose of this training, it's really more, when we say committee or assembly, we're referring to committees, commissions, and boards outside of the full county board. We'll cover public comment and the chair or vice chair's responsibility and the committee's responsibility regarding public comment and speaking during debate. Agendas and notice of meetings will be discussed, what's in them, who's responsible for them to make sure that they are legal meetings. Closed sessions, we'll cover that as well. Motions, so there'll be some discussion on main motions and secondary motions, also known as subsidiary motions, depending on if you're a Robert's Rules of Order nerd or not. They call them different things, so sometimes we call them secondary, sometimes we call them subsidiary, among other things, and how to handle them. Youth and government, so we have a newer component to committees, commissions, and boards that includes, some of them include youth and government as members on those committees, and there's a specific way we would like those handled at the meetings when there's votes and or discussions. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll cover the department head's responsibility, and this can vary depending on you as the chair and what you prefer, but there's also a specific role for them, obviously, within the committees. Prior to the meetings, during the meetings, and following the meetings, department heads are essential to the work that we're doing. Public hearing requirements, Kimberly will cover that with a brief description. We'll provide some tips and or guidance, and if you'd want to share, if you have any that we haven't shared, about keeping speakers on task and how to maintain order properly within the committees. And tips for running efficient meetings, same thing there. That will provide you with some ideas, but of course, if you have things we haven't shared that you would like to offer for your fellow board members, feel free to do that at that time. So conducting committee meetings. They operate under the same rules of procedures as the county board does. So if you remember at your organizational meeting in April, although that tends to be a lot at a meeting and can be confusing, you at that time adopt your new rules for the next term, so for your 2-year term. So your committees operate under those same rules of procedure. There are items within that are specifically called out in rules that may vary a bit from what's in Robert's rules, but it's important to know that they are the same rules. It tends to be much more informal at committee meetings, as I'm sure you've experienced already. Board meetings tend to be a bit more formal in process and procedure. The vice chair becomes responsible if the chair is unavailable. The vice chair then follows those same rules accordingly. And I already said that we're referring to all committees, commissions, boards outside of the full county board. So the process. This is just a bit of a visual to take from a committee meeting, all the way from calling the meeting to order, all the way through the ending of a vote of a specific action. So some of these things may sound obvious, but we're going to say them anyway. So the chair calls the meeting to order. You've experienced that, you see that, but that's their role. So at times, when we were up here, we're paying attention to the time because you want to start at the time that you say your public notice is going to begin. You want to be in the location that you say your agenda says you're going to be in. So the chair is responsible for that and beginning to call the meeting to order. Oops. Determining if there's a quorum. So these things are laid out on the agenda specifically to make sure that the chair is following that according to, so you don't miss anything. So one of the most important things once you're calling the meeting to order is if it's noticed properly. So you go through that process and we identify that it is noticed properly. Then you determine if there's a quorum. And this has come up as a question in the past in terms of what makes a quorum. So even though it may seem obvious to some, we want to make sure that we're identifying we consider a quorum if the majority of the committee members are present. So it's just a simple majority of the members need to be present. Your rules call out a specific addition to that to help make a quorum. Previously, it was the chair could make up a quorum for any committee. The amended rules that you just adopted in April added the vice chair can also make up a quorum if the chair is unable to attend. That's an important differentiation because you wouldn't make up a quorum with both your chair and your vice chair if they were not committee members. So for example, Ron is already on administrative services, so he's already making up that quorum, so that doesn't really help you in the total number of making sure you get a quorum, but Alice can be a member of that to make up the quorum. So she would be able to vote. She's also an ex officio member of every committee that we have identified within our rules. So if there is a member absent, although you may not need her for a quorum, your chair is an ex officio member and would participate in debate and vote in that if she chooses.
Todd, would you clarify when you say chair? Because you started about talking the chair of committees, now you're bringing Alice in as the chair.
County-
Clarify that,
Sorry,
please.
thank you. County board chair. The county board chair, according to your rules, is an ex officio member of every committee. So that has been brought up. It's been a question on whether or not when the chair can, board chair, can vote as not being a member of any committee other than you're a member of public safety, right? So that's just the important differentiation is that they can make up a quorum. Without the quorum, you don't have a meeting. And Kimberly, your corporation counsel has provided that opinion and guidance that there is no conversation, there is no vote, there's nothing, you don't have a meeting if you don't have a quorum. So discussion occurs when a member is recognized by the chair and obtains the floor. So we talk about this a little bit maybe as somewhat informal at committees because you may have participated in committee meetings where you're not necessarily as formal as making sure you're recognized by the chair of that committee. You're supposed to be, but at times, I know that it's happened to me, for example, if I have the floor based on the chair of that committee providing me with the floor to be able to provide information, answer questions, at times while I'm presenting in that setting, a committee member may want to ask me a question. So appropriately, I should be making sure the chair is okay with that, but there are times, for the sake of moving things along, we may recognize you as a committee member to say, oh, you have a question for me since I have the floor. So here, we don't do that. In a board meeting, that's much more formal. You are required, and we have a system that does that. But at the committee, technically, the chair is the only one to be able to give a member of the assembly the floor to be able to speak. So discussion occurs based on that. And of course, obvious reasons for that is it's orderly and organized, and you're not talking over each other. And at times when debates can be a little bit more contentious, a little more heated, it does provide some logical order, hopefully chronologically. At times committee is a little more challenging because it depends if the chair sees you raise your hand if you were first, second, or third, which is another reason why they're a bit more informal, because county board, it's clear because it's ordered on the, when you press your button. Discussion then in between that discussion and debate, obviously, there's a motion. If there's debate, you're debating a motion. So the motion needs to be made as a first and then seconded it for it to be provided to the committee. And I think you cover that in some of your areas. But that's when the debate begins. And that's follows the same thing as I just mentioned as far as discussion goes. The only differentiation is discussion versus debate on a specific motion. Then the chair, of course, I forgot to say that, the chair of the committee, just as occurs in the county board, should be restating that motion. And I think Kimberly will cover that as well, but it's important for clarity for those present, committee members, public, what the actual motion and action being requested of the committee is. And we shouldn't assume that everybody understood it and that it made sense, so it's the chair's responsibility after there's a motion and a second to restate it for the fact of clarity, and they may sometimes need clarification from the individuals who made the motion and seconded the motion. I've seen that before as well, where there may be some significance in the wording that needs to be very clear, and that's why it's important for that to be restated. And then it goes all the way through debate and vote at the end. I would always refer you back also to your rules of order. The agendas follow the departments, and the chairs put those agendas together, and they follow your rules of order for meetings, for order of business. I think it's Rule 5, but it's there. Those rules are made available to you, so in case you do have questions, you're able to refer to those.
Okay, so duties of the chair, chair speaking in debate, and bringing business before assembly. The duties of the chair, really the chair is the one that take control over the meeting. That's their main duty, is to be presiding, and so they're the one that would basically take charge of the meeting. They enforce the rules. They're the ones that set the tone of the meeting. They're the ones, they are the individual that holds the decorum of the meeting. They announce what's coming up, keeps the meeting on track, makes sure they're following the agenda, and indicates what is going to be discussed. So if someone is off topic, they're going to bring them back onto topic. As Todd just mentioned, they're going to restate the motion to place before the body votes. And so that's really important, especially when there's amendments, an amendment to the amendment, so that the body knows exactly what they are voting on. So never be afraid if the chair forgets to restate it, to say, I'm sorry, can you restate the motion so we know what we're voting on? Because that is the job of the chair, because everybody should know exactly what they're voting on, and sometimes always language is important in a motion, so you know exactly what you are voting on. And it's very important in the board meetings. You can't speak unless the chair recognizes you. It's less of an issue in committee meetings, but some of the committees are bigger, like admin services is bigger, and so it can get very, people can talk over each other. So it's still important that the chair recognizes you before you speak so that you're not talking over each other. It's just politeness, and it's also so everybody can hear you. Some people can be soft-spoken, and so you want to make sure the chair recognizes you so when you speak, people can hear you.
The only thing I would add to that is you are individuals with your individual personalities, and your desire to run the meetings may be very different. Some of you even provide more of a formal environment for your committees than others. So that's just important to recognize there is a difference, but you're in charge, so it's really run the way you want it to be run.
And then the chair, not here because the machine does it, but the chair asks for the votes and announces the outcome. So generally it's nays and ayes, and generally it's it's unanimous. But if not, the chair will announce that. Okay, so public comment and speaking during debate. So for public comment, that is on the, if it is on the agenda, it does not have to be on the agenda, just making that clear. It's generally in the beginning of the agenda. It's not the first item on the agenda. And if you look at the current agenda, like our agenda today, it's in the same spot. All the agendas should be outlined the very exact way. So it's typically number 6, public participation. And that really is a time that anybody can come and speak on any item they wish to present, other than endorsing a candidate. So they don't necessarily have to speak on an agenda item. They can come and speak on whatever they want to speak on except for a candidate. It's always a good idea to ask that the speaker announce themselves. And if they refuse to announce themselves, you don't deny them the right to speak, but it's a good idea to have them announce themselves. And there is a time limit, especially in board meeting. I mean, we have a little timer that we time them on, but again, in committee meetings, it's not as strict. You can be strict, I think it's 3 minutes, but you don't have to be as strict. My suggestion for any chairs out there, or vice chairs that are gonna cover for a chair, is if you think it's gonna be a contentious issue, to have a time limit, and have a time limit for everyone, not just for those that are gonna be contentious. If you're gonna have a time limit for one, you have a time limit for everyone. And you indicate that in the beginning before anyone speaks, so that when people come up to present, they know they have a time limit, and everyone knows that they have a time limit. So it's fair for everyone. Speaking during debate, whether or not the chair is going to allow speaking during debate, and by debate I mean when the committee members are debating an issue, it's up to the chair. I would strongly advise against that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not on the agenda that way, so people don't know that. And it's unfair for people that come in the beginning, looking at public participation, speak and leave, thinking that that's their time to speak. It also can get very contentious if you have board members speaking and then you have people from the public speaking and they are talking and the board members are talking. It can get out of control very quickly. And really, if there's a public participation time to speak, that should be their time to speak. And if you have constituents out there that you want to talk to about their issue, you can talk to them after a board meeting. You don't have, or a committee meeting or whatever type of meeting it is. You don't have to talk to them during the committee meeting itself. You can always talk to them afterwards. But to talk to them during the committee meeting is going to waste everyone's time, because it might not be an issue that everybody is involved in. It could be a very contentious issue, and it could bring in tempers that you really don't necessarily need to bring up at a committee meeting. And it could bring in, and there might not be law enforcement available. It could be, it could be an issue that really you just wouldn't want to address at a committee meeting where you don't have the resources that you might need. So my recommendation is don't allow speaking during debate. To me, whenever that has happened, and I've seen it happen a couple of times, it has never ended well. And I've only seen it here a couple of times, but I've seen it in other counties more than that, and again, it has never ended well. Public comment, I think, is important for the legislative process. It lets people give their opinions, and it lets the committee members know what they're thinking about a topic. If you don't let them speak at committee level, you really don't give them an opportunity to give their input. By the time it comes to the county board, it's almost too late, because the committee has ruled, or, had their discussion about it, they're bringing it to the board. So, my position or opinion is always let them have their opportunity to speak at committee meetings. There's always an opportunity, if you don't have time limits, or you aren't clear with expectations of public speaking, to lose control at the meetings. So you just need to make sure that if you're allowing public comment, that you are firm when you say time is over. If they become argumentative, that you know how you're going to respond to that. You have to be kind but firm. You had your time to speak. If you want to speak to a board member afterwards, or a committee member, we'll be happy to talk to you. Or if you want to write a letter, or if you want to give a phone call later, we'll be more than happy to speak with you, but we need to move on. We have an hour set for this meeting, and, whatever the case may be. But you can't just let them continue to go on and on and on. And my suggestion is have a game plan for that before it happens, because some people can't always think quick on their feet. And so if you have your game plan ahead of time, it makes things much more smoother for you in how to deal with that individual. I missed the last one.
Oh, no, you did it.
Okay.
It's the
Yep.
same. You did.
Okay. So the chair, if you are going to allow,
This is committee debate.
oh, sorry. So for the chair responsibilities during debate, remind the members to speak only about the merits of the issue. So if somebody is going off topic, you need to bring them back on topic. They can't start talking about things that are off topic. A chair should not or never interrupt because they know more about the matter than the speaker. Sometimes that's hard for a chair because they might be very knowledgeable about a subject matter and they think the speaker doesn't know what they're talking about, but that's really not the point of the speaker. The speaker is the chair. The chair is really supposed to allow the speaker to speak their mind. So let them speak even if you think you know more than that person. And the chair needs to recognize the person that wants to speak. So, Ty, you have the floor. What would you like to say? And if somebody else thinks that somebody is out of order and somebody says point of order, the chair needs to recognize that and address that point of order. So anybody can say, Chair, that person's out of order, or I call a point of order. The chair would say, what's the point of order? Matthew would say, I think that they've spoke 4 times and they're only allowed 3 times, and then the chair makes the decision. Or the chair can say, what's the opinion of the committee, or what's the opinion of the board? So anybody can argue a point of order, but the chair ultimately decides it unless the chair wants to put it back to the committee.
The only other thing I would add to this section is not even interrupting just because you think you know more, but if the person has the floor and they're speaking and they don't have the facts correct, you still don't have a right to interrupt that individual because their interpretation of the information may be different than yours. They may actually have an error in facts, but it doesn't allow the individuals within the committee to interrupt and just say, oh, by the way, you have that wrong. I mean, that's until they get the floor, then they can point that out if they need to at that time.
The chair the chair also can allow discussion to a pending question, but not an off-topic question. And then under no circumstances should the chair question the motive of a person who is speaking. So if a person is presenting their opinion, a chair shouldn't say, well, you're only making that comment because of X, or you shouldn't be making that comment because of Y. They should have the ability to make their comment and not be judged based on why they are making that comment or under what circumstances they're making their comment. Again, the chair's responsibility is to control the time limits and the number of times they can speak. That is one thing we deviate from Robert's rules. Robert's rules is a person can speak twice. In our rules, a person can speak 3 times. And I don't know the time limit for Robert's rules, but I believe our time limit is 3 minutes. And so that would be committee as well, but I don't think anybody keeps track of the time in committee, only in the board. But that doesn't mean you can't if you're the chair of a committee, especially if you have a contentious issue.
And it also, the chair can also control that based on repeating yourself. So if you've been provided the floor 2 different times, you're saying the same information, you may be called on and asked to provide new information and not repeat. That has happened both at board meetings and at committee meetings.
Okay, agendas, notices, and closed sessions. So, for agendas, the agenda is kind of a dual responsibility because the chair does part of the agenda and then the department head. The chair and the department head really work hand in hand on agendas. And I think in the beginning for a chair that it's kind of a learning process or a learning curve as to what the department head does and what the chair does. So the chair basically determines what's on the agenda, but really takes input from the department head. And the chair must follow the format of the agenda. They can't be vague. So I read every agenda that comes out, and sometimes I will call on it. Like, if the agenda's too vague, if I don't understand what's gonna be discussed on the agenda, I will call the department head and say, I have no idea what that is. If it just says farmland, I will call Tony Reale and say, Tony, what is this farmland? And if he explains it to me, I'll say, it needs to be more descriptive, because we could get in trouble for that, which means the chair can get in trouble for that, because this is your agenda. And so you need to be descriptive. Now, you don't need a paragraph, but you need enough for somebody to know what that is when they look at the agenda. Enough to know, is that something I want to discuss or participate in? And so I review those, and I'm assuming your department head will talk to you about that. When you say, I want to talk about this, they'll make sure it's descriptive enough. So work with your department head on that. As the chair, you probably will be receiving requests to place agenda items on your agenda, and they could be from committee members, it could be from citizens. So you would take all that information, but as the chair, you would decide what actually goes on the agenda. And you would probably work with your department head on that and say, because the department head also is quite knowledgeable about what's going on in the community, and they might say, this month probably is not a good time to put that on. Next month this is going on, so that might be a better month to put it on. You'd have a discussion about that. And then also, there must be at least 24 hours notice for any agenda unless it's an emergency. And by emergency, I mean like a COVID type thing. That's when we utilize the non-24 hours because things were changing quite quickly. But other than that, it really needs to be 24 hours or more. And we don't like to do 24 hours. We like to do at least a couple of days. So make sure that you're working with your your department head well in advance of when you are going to be having your committee meeting or board meeting or
Whatever that is.
yeah.
We also ask that if it's going to be one of those considered emergent meetings where you're not meeting those timelines, that it's provided to the attorney to make sure that she agrees that it's an urgent matter. So I've done that. I can't remember if it was around a building purchase that we had only so much time, but to make sure that we're getting a legal opinion on it, because we don't want to make a mistake and be liable for something that violates open meetings.
And so for the chair, understanding the department head really assists with pending items to be addressed, like that's what I was talking about, you know, see what would be good things to be putting on the agenda or maybe tabling them for a later time. They're actually the ones that type it up, drafts the agenda, they'll provide it to the chair. Does this look okay? Do you like the order of this? And not so much the order, the formatting, but more so the order of the discussion items, because the other stuff is, it's the format that we have to follow. And then the chair would approve it before distributing it.
They also can advise whether or not it's a required action item by the committee. So oftentimes, the chair of the committee may, you know, agree with the item that's on there, but will say, well, do we need to take action? Is that something we need to refer to the full county board? Or what's the appropriate process for seeking approval of the county board? The department heads are your resident experts as it relates to that and can provide guidance, because the agenda also needs to specify if it's an action item. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to take any action.
And there are sometimes I'll review an agenda and say that really is an action item, you need to move it up to an action item because you're gonna be voting on it. Like the chairs who will receive items to put on the agenda, department heads will also receive items that people want to see added to the agenda, and they'll forward it to the board chairs for their consideration to put on the agenda. And it's the department heads that actually post the notices for the public meetings, and they will know the posting requirements. Notices have to be reasonably specific regarding agenda items, and that's what I was talking about. If it's too vague, I'll call them out on it. Department heads should also be making a note of that. If a chair will put something down that's just too vague, they'll typically say that there needs to be more information on it, because you work with it all the time and the department heads work with it all the time. It might not be vague to them. That's why I'm a good person to read it, because I don't know zoning and planning, I don't know land and water, so I'm reading it and I'm like, what? I mean, I've called this out on Chris a couple of times, just because they work with it every day, so it's not too vague for them because it's in their brain and that's what they've been working on 24/7. So I'll say, I need a little more information for that. Or Todd, because he likes it to be vague. And I'll say, no, it needs to be a little more information. And so we'll come up with something that meets both of our needs.
It's flexibility.
Yeah.
This also applies to the action item that I just mentioned, so it's important for the public to know, is this just a discussion item, so they can be aware whether or not this is something I need to attend, or I'll wait until they're gonna take action on it when it gets closer to being something, so they're not spending time in your meeting if you're not gonna actually have action on it. But it's important for them to be aware when you're actually going to be committing to taking action on a specific item.
And the Attorney General's advised posting at least 3 places. Where do we post?
It's right here. It's on your. Oh, were you asking me, or?
No, I was
Oh,
looking at Beth.
It's on our.
Libraries, the website.
It's right here.
I was trying to.
The municipalities.
Engaged.
Close to more than 3.
More than 3.
And we put it on our, I think we put all of them on our line.
On the
Yeah,
website.
on the website.
Yep. Yeah. The ultimate responsibility is for the chair of the committee, so you always want to make sure that you talk to your department head and make sure that they did the posting. And again, like I've said a couple of times now, if you're allowing public comment, it has to be on the agenda. It's not required, but for committee meetings, I'd strongly support that. I would not support having comment during debate, but I would support having public comment during a public comment section. It's just not required.
an example of that is staff had asked a chair to not allow public comment in a specific contentious issue where the individual has come before the committee and said the same thing meeting after meeting after meeting. So that's an example of it really at your discretion. Unless there's something new, you could offer that as well and say, you know, welcome to this committee. If you'd like to provide public comment, as long as it's new information and that you're not repeating the last comments you've made at several, because the committee has heard and taken it into consideration.
So closed sessions, this is one I'm involved in every time there's a closed session. So Todd has made it a rule that anytime there's a closed session, I need to be aware of it to make sure that there's an appropriate reason for the closed
You
session.
need to approve it. You need to approve it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. To make sure that it meets one of the exemptions. And there are a number of exemptions, and if I can't find an appropriate exemption, then it doesn't happen. So there are some times that people want an exemption, and they just aren't there. So.
That's why we ask and you have to approve. Even if I request it, you have to approve it, because the liability doesn't rest with us, the liability rests with you as individual county board supervisors. So it's just an attempt to make sure that we're protecting you as your staff from violating open meetings.
Yes, and they're very specific. So we've been in closed sessions. I think several of you have been in closed sessions already, like bargaining, if we're gonna put an offer in on a building or on land. Clearly, those are closed session type issues because you don't want the public to be here to know what our highest amount we're gonna offer is. I mean, that makes sense. Or a disciplinary action on an employee. We certainly don't want to embarrass anybody, but we want the board to be aware of what's going on. So things like that. There are other exemptions, very specific railroad issues, probably things we will never encounter, but they are very, very specific. In closed session, if you go in closed session, there's no notes taken for closed session. So if, for example, your note taker is not there, you don't take notes for that. For the closed session, there are no notes during closed session. And a closed session should always be the exception rather than the rule. There are, like I had indicated, there's very specific reasons why you go in closed session. And everything really should be an open session unless it's been approved by me and there's really a valid reason. You can't exclude elected or appointed members to go into closed session, and it should be the expectation that anything in closed session stays in closed session, kind of like Vegas. And we've had this conversation in the past. For example, what happens if someone talks about an issue that's happened in closed session, outside of closed session? And there's really nothing that can happen, but the whole point of going into closed session is confidentiality. And if you're gonna break that confidentiality, it really breaks the trust of your co-members. So it's really advised, if you're gonna go into closed session, to keep that confidential, because it breaks the trust of the members within your committee. That's all I have on that one.
I know, it was slow to click. I think there is an ethics component as being
Yeah.
a board member if you were to violate the closed session requirements and share information outside of closed session. It's pretty vague in your rules because we had a committee set up a long time ago that was difficult to retain because, I mean, it's very nice to say we really didn't have ethical issues, so they didn't have anything to do. So that really wasn't an active committee. So if they were needed, your rules allow them to be gathered, and it's identified the specific people that would meet the requirements to be on that ethics committee.
When there is a closed session, the government body, the committee, the commission, the board, whatever it is, can admit anybody they want to admit, who they deem as necessary. So oftentimes, you will see staff members ask Todd, should we be staying? If there is a financial person, typically, for example, the lady that presents like the bonding.
Oh, sure, yeah, Carol.
Carol.
Carol Worth.
She might be asked to stay. You know, anybody that's necessary to present might be asked to stay, but they would have to be asked and invited to stay. You can't just stay at a closed session because you want to stay unless you're an elected or an appointed member of that body. Jeez, I feel like I've
You have
talked a
I
lot.
know. Unfortunately, that's how this divided out. I don't remember.
Oh,
I was gonna
God.
do it all myself last time, so.
Yes, but then I came back.
Now we're sharing.
Yes, so motions. You have your main motion, and then you have your second, you could have secondary or subsidiary. As Todd indicated, they can be called two different things. So those secondary motions deal with the original main motion. You can have privilege, and some examples of those are postpone, or limit debate, or lay on the table. Those would be secondary motions. I'll cover those in a second. Privilege motions are not related to any secondary or main motions. They're not related to the business of those motions. Those are like, you're gonna call for a recess, or adjournment, or call to order. Follow the agenda. And then you have the incidental motions, which are, need to be decided immediately, and those are like to change the procedure for handling a motion, such as suspend the rules or point of order, which we had talked about point of order previously. So I'm going to talk about those. So amendments to the main motion. So you have a main motion made. I make a motion to buy a squad car. That's my main motion. So amending the main motion, it must be relevant to the main motion. So I can't say I move to amend to add a stoplight at 3rd and Main, because that has nothing to do with the squad car. So that would be out of order. So my amending the main motion would have to be, I amend the main motion to add 2 squad cars to the agenda. So that would be a valid amendment, because it goes to the squad car. An amendment to the amendment must be relevant to the first amendment. So you couldn't say something like, I would move to amend the first amendment to add a stop sign at 4th and Main. Again, not relevant to adding a second squad car. But you could say, I move to amend to add not more than 3 squad cars, because that would be relevant to the first amendment. You cannot have more than 2 amendments going at the same time. Does that make sense to everybody? Those amendments, because they can get a little tricky. They did at the last meeting.
Amendment to the
Well,
amendment.
you gotta end it with what got tricky is you have to return to the
Yes.
amended main motion.
So you have to address the amendment to the amendment. So you have to address, I move to amend to not add more than 3 squad cars. And then after that's addressed, you have to address, I move to amend not more than 2 squad cars. And then you have to address the main motion. You can't just jump right to the main motion. You have to go back in order. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes.
Just for clarity's sake, at our last rules meeting, there was some confusion because we voted on a time and then as an amendment to the motion. And then when it came back to the motion, there were some that thought we were voting on the original motion still rather than, so we had to vote twice on the amended motion to actually have it be the rule.
So where that got confusing is the amendment, I don't remember what the amendment to the amendment was.
There was the
Time
timing.
change.
So the timing was, let's just, rather than try to replay that exactly,
Okay.
okay?
I'm just,
Because we've talked about that, that's why this was added very clearly for the sake of, so let's use the time as an example rather than the squads. So your main motion was to adopt your rules, okay? The amendment to that motion was to change the board meetings to 4 o'clock. There was no action on that until there's an amendment to the amendment, which says you have to then only deal with the time, which is what Kimberly is saying, because it layers, right? So your focus is getting more narrow. You have the rules, you have the time of the meeting, the amendment to the amendment can only relate to the time of the meeting, so then that becomes 6. Then the action on 6 o'clock is the action, and you return then to the main motion as amended.
right, so each
So it would be
time
6
you would have
o'clock
to
if
vote
that
on it. If you
passed.
had if you had two amendments, you'd have to vote twice to bring that
You vote once.
third amendment back to the, no?
No, so if you look at this slide,
Mhm.
we're amending the main motion, we're amending the amendment, we're taking action on that amendment to the amendment, then so if that passed, there's no point in going back to 4 o'clock because you already approved as a majority of the board 6 o'clock. Then you go back to the main motion as amended, which is adopt the rules as amended for 6 o'clock. That's how it's supposed to work.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, so we kind of voted twice on that when we should have just voted the once.
You vote, well, I don't know what you did exactly anymore, do you? That's why I didn't want to go back to that, Simeon, I'm sorry. I don't have a direct recollection of that.
Sure.
This is the right way to do it.
Okay, so
You
when you
go
make a
because-
subsidiary motion, whenever that's voted on, then you go back to the original.
Because, and that's why I was trying to make sure everybody understands that, the majority of the board, if you pass the amendment to the amendment, you're done. There's no point in going back to that first amendment because you've already said as a majority of the board, it's 6 o'clock. Then you're back to the main motion as amended with 6 o'clock. So you skip that.
But you still have to address the main motion.
Yes, you go back to the main motion as amended if you voted to amend it. But where it gets confusing is that amendment to the amendment is your action, then you're all the way back to the main.
Okay.
Because you already voted in favor of.
Thank you.
If it failed, you're back to the amended motion, the amendment to the amendment, or the first
Main
amendment,
one.
if it failed. Does that make sense? There's conversations about why you don't allow an amendment to the amendment, because you don't have to do that. So we'll talk about that in rules at a future date, if the chair would like us to put that on the agenda.
Okay. So can we move on from amendments to amendments? I mean, amendments to motions? Okay.
Crystal
So,
clear.
yeah. Motion to lay on the table temporarily sets aside the matter with the intent of addressing it later. So you wouldn't want to make a motion to lay on the table if you didn't want to address it later still at that meeting, at the same meeting. So, let's say, this can come up when someone has to leave and a person wants to address a topic before they leave. And so they can say, can I make a motion to lay this issue on the table? Can we address this issue so we can vote on it before I have to leave? Knowing that that motion that they laid on the table is gonna be brought back after they leave because they don't care if they vote on this particular motion when they leave. Does that make sense?
Or the
Okay.
other one's more important.
Right.
Or if you bring it back at a later date, you have to ask to.
That's
get
also
back
on here.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and if it's just to lay it on the table just because you don't want to talk about it anymore, that is not a proper use of motion to lay on the table. It really has to be because you want to bring something else up. Motion to postpone to a certain time, I think that's what Alice was just talking about, is when you want to set something aside and delay it for to a specific time. It could be at a later date, it could be a different meeting. And this sometimes occurs when you want input from a committee. So it comes before the board and you don't think the committee, or you don't, it didn't go to committee yet, or you don't think the committee had all the information, so you want to send it back to committee. So you make a motion to postpone to a time certain, and you say you want it to come back in 3 months after it has gone back to committee, and it can come back after it's gone to committee. So it's a definite date, it's a definite meeting, and you set it. A motion to just postpone without a specific time is out of order.
How is this, is there a vote then on that? If somebody wants to delay it, then does everybody vote on that?
On that particular one, I
It's
believe there is a
motion to
vote.
postpone.
Yep.
And it requires a second. Is it debatable?
I will check
Yes, it
that
does.
out.
So you
One
do have
moment.
to have the majority vote, Buzz, to be able to postpone to a time certain. You can't
To
just stand
postpone
up
to a
and say
time
that.
certain is required, and it is debatable.
So that
There
would
is
be
a second,
specific
and it is
motion,
debatable.
Yes.
seconded and then debated by the county board,
And
and then
then
a
a majority
majority
vote.
vote required.
Because we did have something that came up a while back, that I wish we would have done that right.
This is why this is helpful. Is this on the desk card too?
Yep.
Okay, some of these are also on that laminated desk card too.
It can get tricky.
And there are times during the meeting, if you asked for the floor and you're unclear about the motion that would assist you in getting to the outcome you want, there's no harm in asking that. Just so you know, I know newer board members, if this is confusing, this is a lot of information, or, you know, you want something specifically to happen, if you sometimes just describe, hey, I want this to wait until the highway committee can meet about it next month and then bring it back, what do I have to do to make that happen? That can be in the meeting, and we can provide guidance as to what that would be. You still need the majority of board to agree, but we can help you frame some of those, because I know some of you have come up to me specifically and said, I was confused about how that went. Don't sit in confusion. Ask, press your button, and don't be afraid to ask the question, because that's what we're here, Kimberly and I are here for.
Motion to postpone indefinitely, this is the motion when you really just don't want it to come back. You feel that you've debated it, it's on the floor, but you get the sense that you really don't want to vote on it, and the board doesn't want to take any action. Whatever action it would take would not be a good one, and you just want the motion to go away. But it's already been made and seconded, so you have to do something with it. Once a motion is made and seconded, you can't withdraw it. I know some people do that, but that's really not appropriate. You can't withdraw a motion once it's been made. So this is what you use to get rid of a motion, is motion to postpone indefinitely. It kills the motion, it withdraws, it avoids the vote, and it is debatable. So just because you make that doesn't mean it's gonna happen, because maybe somebody does want to vote on it, but it's a way to get rid of a motion without a vote.
A motion that's been made and seconded.
Yes.
So that's what then belongs to the body. So you can't just say, oh, I'll take that back
Yeah.
and we're all good.
That's why it's always important to think of your second, because once a motion is made and seconded, it's out there and you have to take action on it. Motion to call for the question is basically saying, okay, enough debate, let's take a vote. It requires 2/3 vote, which means that 2/3 have to agree that the discussion is to end and you're to take the vote. This cannot be used to stop debate. So if there are still people that want to talk and debate and have the opportunity, you can't just decide to close it. That doesn't mean that if everybody's had 3 times to talk, you can't do this, because you can. But some people, and I'm not saying anybody here, but I do remember in the past, people would say, motion to call the question, because they were just tired of people talking. And they wanted to get the vote, and they wanted to get going. So that's not the point for this. Typically, it's when it's just been debated and debated, and people are now starting to repeat the same things over and over and over again, and somebody just needs to say, okay, we've heard it all, let's call the question. But again, 2/3 of people need to agree to that. It's not a given.
And it requires you to have the floor. So in the past, we've had members, while the body was debating and somebody else has the floor, shouts out, call the question, because they're tired of the debate. I know Ron's smiling, because it's happened in the past. Technically, that's not accurate. You can't do that. You're supposed to wait to have the floor, at which time then you can appropriately make a motion.
And then point of order, I did kind of cover this before, but that's when you don't have to wait to be called on. You can say point of order, and that's when you feel that the rules are being violated. So you'd say point of order, the chair, would recognize you, or you would recognize the person that would say point of order. It takes precedent over whatever's going on the floor, and you as the chair would say, what's your point of order, and you would identify the rule that you feel has been broken, and it's not debatable. It's just the chair makes the decision if they believe that the rule's been broken, or they can give it back to the committee and vote on whether or not they believe that the rule actually has been broken, if the chair so decides.
This has been used more frequently as far as point of order if the conversation or topic wanders off of your required agenda. So somebody may say point of order if the conversation has wandered to a point where we're talking about something entirely differently, which can happen. Somebody could at that point, so that's why it really is a priority for us to stop the conversation and have the chair be able to rule on that point of order.
And then motion to adjourn. Not all situations require a motion to adjourn. You can have an adjournment when all business has been done and the hour to end has arrived. So if everything on your agenda has been taken care of and the time for the meeting to have ended has come and gone, you don't need a motion to adjourn. The chair can just basically say, having conducted all business and having the time come to, end of the meeting, I'm going to adjourn the meeting unless I have an objection, that type of thing. Or you can say, do I have a motion to adjourn? And I am finally done with my section.
Yes.
Whew!
Yeah, all right. Youth in Government Program. So this was added because there is a component, an element with youth in government actually being on some of the committees that you will be on and/or chair. So to be clear, and we've had conversations with some of you regarding youth in government when we were first creating the program. I don't think we've had it since the new members.
No.
It's important to know that county board supervisors, or in this instance, in some committees, it can be the non-elected members who are members of the committees, must make the motions and the seconds. That is not a role of the youth on the committee. They know this, part of this includes things for them, like Catherine's here. So Catherine's one of our new youth in government individuals. So they would raise their hand. They know that they're supposed to raise their hand to ask the chair to speak. When called upon, they ask a question, make a statement relating to an agenda item being discussed. Vote on a motion. So what we're asking as a part of the youth in government program for those of you who have them on your committees is that they would be asked to vote, and theirs is a non-binding vote that doesn't count as the majority of the committee, so that they're engaged in the conversation, they're aware of what the motion is, it's an educational moment for them. So if they had a specific question about the motion, they can ask the chair, and the chair then will ask them how would they vote if this was something they were going to be voting on. And we've explained to them that they don't need to explain the why they voted in one way or the other, nor do we ask members of the committee to indicate why they voted one way or the other. But it engages the individual youth as to what's happening within the committee and the actions that they're taking. So it does take an extra step. It's a little bit of a learning opportunity. So as chairs of those committees, we are asking for that special moment during that time. Staff will try to remind you if you are moving things along and forget to ask them. They will not be allowed to attend closed sessions. So as Kimberly discussed before, in terms of those that are allowed to remain in closed session, the youth know that they would not remain in a closed session. I already said this, they're a non-binding advisory vote. It's a learning opportunity. There is an attendance requirement. We're not asking you as board members, chairs, or committee members to worry about that. We're taking care of that with Maggie and the UW Extension staff and myself regarding the attendance. They have specific attendance requirements to be active participants on the committees. One of them includes some participation in county board, 1 or 2 meetings a year, I think, one. And then 50% participation. It gets a little challenging for the youth if their meetings are during the day and it's during school. They are instructed to let us know if they're unable to attend. So just as you are with the committees, it's the courteous thing for them to do is let us know if they can't make it. It's a little bit of a struggle, learning curve, because they're trying to figure out who they're communicating with in the beginning, but we're figuring that out. Any questions about the youth program?
Supervisor Schwalmberg?
If they can vote, which is non-binding, are they used to declare a quorum? Can they make up a quorum?
They do not make up a quorum.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
I also had one other comment regarding quorum. It certainly is up to the members of a committee to let their chair know if they are going to be in attendance or not, because that way the chair will know if he is going to have, or she, have a quorum, and if not, can call upon myself or the vice chair to make that quorum. So it's just a little added step, but it is a courtesy to let the chair know if you will attend or not. Thank you.
Yes. Kimberly touched upon this a little bit on the slide, side-by-side slide with the chair. But it's important to know that department heads have responsibilities for your committees. I'm sure many of you are already aware of that. They assist with the agenda, as Kimberly had discussed earlier. They will typically make recommendations or requests if they know that there's an action item required on the agenda. I have yet to have a chair refuse to put certain things on that department heads would like, but sometimes there's a discussion and department heads know that the chair has to approve the content of the agenda. That at times, and I'm just asking for, give us a little grace sometimes, that some chairs have delegated that entirely and do not even want to have us ask permission for specific agenda items because they've designated the department head to do that. That's not too common, but it does happen. So you just want to make sure what your intentions are with the department head so that you are approving that agenda, how best to be able to do that. Some of you like a phone call, some of you just like an email. It's important for them to know what the expectations are. Discussion versus when they know they need an actual action item. I think I talked about that, but sometimes statutory requirements exist, those types of things. The department heads are your experts We don't expect board members to know everything about everything within the department area that you are serving on for the committee. That's what your department heads are for. It's better to rely on them as the experts and ask them when those things are required and when they're not. You could certainly say, well, can we take action anyway, even though it's not required? That would be your prerogative as the chair, certainly. Department heads draft resolutions on your behalf as well. I don't know, as chairs of some committees who have had resolutions, how great we are about providing those to you ahead of an agenda item. Matthew, for example, do you ever see a resolution before it goes on the agenda? Typically not, I would say. Yeah, so I'm guessing that that's something we develop. We provide it to Kimberly for review, and David if it has a financial impact. So staff have taken care of that item for you up to the point where you're going to meet. So you would be approving the agenda, but we'll be making sure that the resolution content is appropriate. And then, of course, you, when you take action on it, can amend that as you see fit once that's provided. But we'll draft it to make sure it meets the requirements of the action that you wish to take. Resolutions versus motions of support. So that's another item. There are times when resolutions are absolutely necessary and when they're not. And you can always ask your department head or staff, is this an item we need a resolution for, or is this something we can just take a motion of action on? And we'll be able to tell you that. There are certain requirements. Let's say it's a financial change to the budget. There is a specific thing we're going to follow through as a resolution to make that change versus just a motion of action or support. We are the ones that are need to be aware of what is required. So oftentimes we'll be having a conversation about what the intention is. So if the sheriff would like a piece of equipment and it's become twice as expensive as it was when we budgeted it, which that's not against the sheriff's office, it's just the cost of equipment. So let's say, or it could be highway equipment, anything. We budgeted $200,000, we got our quote 6 months after the budget's already been adopted and it's twice as much. There's a process that we are required to do to follow your rules, which means Home Committee would adopt the resolution if there's time to do so. Administrative Services Committee has the authority over the budget and allowing or not the item to go forward, and then it requires the 2/3 adoption of the county board to amend the budget. So we're supposed to be the experts aware of what is required to take action on certain things, what county approval process is required. It doesn't always line up nicely, depending on when you are meeting as committees, but we'll do our best to have the home committee action first, and so forth. Minutes, they are your minute takers, whether they're doing it themselves or have staff assigned. As chairs or committee members, you should not have to be distracted by making sure you're following along with all the minutes and taking those as the meeting occurs. You are required to review them and approve them once they're provided to you. And then department heads should be prepared to provide necessary handouts and information for you to make informed decisions.
Public hearing requirements. The public hearings, public meetings or public hearings, really the public hearings that we have are in land and water. Chris has to deal with them almost every month. And so the chair of that committee really has to be aware. Is that Mike again?
It's Mike Hoffberger.
Mike Hoffberger.
Planning
Yeah.
and zoning.
Yeah.
Planning and zoning.
Most often.
And so he needs to be an expert in the public hearing arena. I'm not sure if there's really any other committee that has a public hearing as often as land and water, or planning and zoning, excuse me. Tony Reilly may have a public hearing, yeah.
Really. There's
But-
budget requirements within some
Once a
that
year,
we have to
yeah.
do it. There's grants that require it sometimes.
So I know we need it for budget once a year, but Land and Water, or Planning and Zoning, excuse me. God, it's getting late. Planning and Zoning has it almost every month, if not every month. The person, whoever chairs or is vice chair for that committee, really needs to be aware or work very closely with Chris to know the rules of the public meeting. And they're laid out in statute. That's what you have to follow, either in statute or administrative rule and county ordinance. And certain plans require also a public hearing. So the comprehensive plan, the watershed plan, any zoning ordinances, and our budget, all has to be done through public hearing. And the reason for a public hearing is really when we want to get the public in on a topic and we want to get input in. A lot of input in on a specific issue. Oftentimes, we don't get public opinion. I mean, if you look at how many people come to our budget meeting, gives you a good indicator of the public input, but sometimes for the comprehensive plan, we get input. I don't know about the watershed plan. I didn't attend, so I don't know if we got any input. That's Tony Reilly's issue.
Water.
Land
It's
and
finally
water.
on land and water.
Yeah, that is land and water. I didn't attend that one, so I don't know if he had a lot of attendance on that one. But sometimes it's hot topics and sometimes not at all. So public hearings are mostly statutory and administrative, and it's a process. There's publications that are required. It's mostly 3 publications, 2 or 3 publications that are required. I think budget requires 3 publications. Public hearings for land and water, yes, 2. So it really just depends on what you have to follow, and it's laid out. If you don't follow them, you can't have the hearing, and so it's very specific. If you're in that committee and you need any help, I strongly suggest you work with the department head, because they work with it monthly. And typically, if they need help, then they reach out to me and we figure it out together, because by no means am I an expert. They're the ones that work with it much more often than I do, but we can figure it out. They're smarter than I am when it comes to that stuff, though, just because they work with it much more than I do. But I can certainly read a statute. So, for all of those reasons, definitely, if you're involved in those committees, work with your department heads very closely, especially when it comes to the publication, because that can really screw you up. And oftentimes, when it comes to planning and zoning, there are property owners attached to those, and they can get really upset because they are making plans on their property, and if publication is missed and they have to go to the next month, that can delay their plans for their property. So you definitely want to work with your department head on that if you are the chair or the vice chair in that committee.
Good?
I'm good.
All right. Speaking of keeping speakers on task, so we will make sure that as chairs and as staff, we will assist you with that, to make sure it's agenda specific. So the conversation needs to be relevant to the agenda. So as Kimberly identified how the specifics around an agenda need to be clear, the conversation needs to stay on topic as well. So you as the chair are responsible for making sure you call that out if the conversation tends to wander off of the agenda. Communications, there have been times when in committees there's discussion regarding communications. So we want to be clear that those communications that come in as you call for them are referred. They can be referred, you'll see that at the board where the chair asks about any communications, she's provided with one at a time, and then she deals with them one at a time, usually by referring to a specific committee. So when you're in receipt of those and you plan on discussing those, doesn't mean you have to, just because you received them. It's moved on to the committee and to the department to deal with how they choose. So if you are going to have them, you need to have them on the agenda if there's going to be discussion. Sometimes you receive them directly as a committee, and if you're at first reviewing them, you see them, but then you can move that on to an agenda item at a future date for discussion. The supervisor member meetings attended, so there's that portion of the agenda where the chair asks if there's anybody, supervisor reports, basically. The committees there's an attempt to confine those to meetings you've attended or things you've attended, information you've become aware of within the last month. So it doesn't open it up and make this broad conversation under this broader topic already on supervisor reports. So the chair is responsible to make sure, and I've heard many chairs say that, anything that you've attended within the last month or anything you would like to add from within the last month, whether that was a training, whether that was reading that you did, information you gathered or learned within the last month, so as to not make that broad conversation to wander off and violate open meetings. So that's what we mean by keeping speakers on task. Efficient meetings, effective meetings, you learn from your peers, you learn from chairs as you've been at meetings. You've seen you've seen your peers run meetings and share them and how they do that, how they restate motions and things like that. So you've seen them do that well. You've seen some, getting through the agenda. There are, like I said before, there are very differing personalities. There's differing ways that you prefer to run a meeting, and it's the chair's prerogative and how they do that. But the chair needs to work through the agenda, introducing all items within the agenda unless it's been amended ahead of time, while also keeping an eye on time and content. So it's important that you're paying attention to that as the chair, and that you're always getting back to the main point of the purpose of that agenda item, the reason that you're meeting, and also ensuring that you're involving everyone. Now, this is a little more difficult to do for some, but again, you are very individual people, so some are very comfortable just asking anything, any kind of a question, open-ended, not super concerned about it. Others are much more quiet and are processing information as they're hearing it in the moment. The chair's responsibility really is to make sure when they ask, are there questions? Do you have questions? Do you have any concerns about this? They really should be engaging you as you should be engaging your members as individuals to make sure that they have a opportunity to ask a question and to speak, because it doesn't come easy to everybody to raise their hand immediately. So those that you noticeably are seeing as more quiet, wondering whether or not they understand what the topic is as a newer member, because some of you may have been on the same committee for several terms now and have that expert knowledge where newer members do not. You really should be able to take the time to ask them. Department heads also do that, just so you know. They will work with their committee members as well to make sure you're getting the information and an understanding. But that really is the role of the chair, to make sure that everyone's involved and everyone on that committee has a voice. Of course, reaching decisions, it's the chair's responsibility to pull together the points of discussion and reach a decision on things that we need action items on. The chairs do a good job summarizing what's before them so that the members know what they're voting on. If they need clarification, even though the motion may speak for itself, there's some things that may need clarification within what's the impact of our decision. If we do this with the motion that's there, it's important that the chair asks those types of questions if it's an unknown. Maintaining order, we've talked about that. It's not always easy for everyone to make sure that they're maintaining the order, but I don't think we've ever really had an unruly, out-of-order bunch. So it must be working. But there are times, not so much with peers, but sometimes with public overheated topics. It's also your responsibility to control that. That can be a little more difficult. But I would say most of the time, department heads, we know When there's a contentious issue, we're there to support you. If you want to make sure there's additional assistance at a meeting, don't be afraid to ask us. We'll provide that for you. It hasn't happened in a long time, but we have had to do that in the past, where law enforcement's been invited just to watch, to make sure everything goes well. Something about the comfort of law enforcement and the fear that they may put in others to behave, that does happen. I don't think
That it?
I have anything else.
Okay, are there any questions about any of this that you've heard? Supervisor Hausberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How long can we wait for that county board chair or the county board vice chair if we need that person for a quorum?
10 minutes?
I had that situation once, and it happened really quick. But on the other hand, sometimes, like there is something that has to happen, and we'd rather wait a half an hour for that person to come.
I'd say a reasonable period of time.
Okay, that's what I was afraid you were going to say.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the attorney's answer. How long does it take Alice
Yeah.
or Ron to get there?
Yeah,
I mean, if you're waiting an hour, I would say that's kind of a long time.
Unreasonable.
I got it.
Yeah, I'd say an
Okay.
hour is an
45 minutes,
unreasonable
reasonable.
time.
yeah, I don't want to know any, I don't think I want to know
Ron's
any.
a little longer.
They're pretty close.
I'm pretty
Can a committee chair have somebody else repeat the motion? Usually we have, somebody taking notes. I'd rather have that person actually, okay. Can a closed session be on the spot, or does that have to be something that was on the agenda?
It has to be on the agenda.
And then my last question is on that motion to adjourn. Kimberly mentioned, as I understood it, that if all the agenda items have been covered and the time has been reached, I don't have times on, we don't know how long our meetings are going to take.
Yep. If all of your agenda items have been done, have been completed, you don't need a motion. You can just indicate that if anybody doesn't have anything else, I would move to adjourn. Hearing nothing, I'm adjourning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Diedrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a difference between how we conduct business in the board setting, more formal. The biggest difference I recall, or I would point out, is that the chair does not engage in debate of motions. However, on the committee level, that's somewhat relaxed, and the chairs can address issues, or is it not relaxed?
Well, it is more relaxed than it is on the county board floor. So for example, what Ron is referring to, if there is a specific motion before the county board and the chair wants to participate in the debate, she needs to remove herself from the position of chair and join the floor. The vice chair assumes that position, and then she's a part of the debate. And that really is appropriate within a committee, but we don't do it. So, but what I will say is I've not ever witnessed a chair so strong in a debate at a committee level as to attempt to sway that body into a different way of a motion. So technically speaking, as the chair, you are supposed to present as impartial. And even though you do not lose your right to vote, you do not lose your right to your opinion or your action, and neither does Alice. But as the chair, your main role is really to allow, as a impartial member. And that is only to encourage each person to have their own view, their own opinion, put forward the debate, as otherwise they may say, well, you're in charge, technically I don't want to speak out against Ron in this, plus he's been here longer, he may know. So technically, we don't do it in the same way. At a committee, you don't say, I need to remove myself as chair. You don't do it that way. But I also have never seen it that way.
Thank you.
Supervisor Miller.
Tunis.
Oh,
Kathy.
excuse me, Supervisor Tunis.
Did I get it? Okay. It was a very detailed training that you gave us. And I was wondering, is that going to be available someplace online that we are able to refer back to it?
Yes, and we actually have handouts, I forgot. I usually don't hand them out beforehand.
Do you want me to do it?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, we do have them for you. Thank you. I would have forgotten, Kathy.
All right. Now Supervisor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is on joint committee meetings. There's probably half a dozen of us here that a decade ago were involved in joint committee meetings, specifically when we had public grounds. They would meet with Highway Committee or Administrative Services Committee. So in our official directory, on page 54, it explains that both committees, if you meet, both have the opportunity to vote. And it also states that the chairs of the committee involved in the joint meetings shall determine who will chair the meetings. Now, hopefully that's not done as a coin flip. What I experienced in the past is because the person, the chair of the committee that's maybe most involved with the critical issues will do that. Is that still a standard, is what I want to know?
It's made, the decision is made between the two chairs. So
That's what it
for
says?
Yeah, so for example, I know Health and Human Services Board will meet with the advisory committee of the ADRC. Typically, Mary chairs it because that's the board and the other is the advisory, although I don't think there's ever been an issue. What I thought you were gonna say was as it related to quorum, because we didn't talk about that. And that issue was a very contentious issue back in the day, if some of you remember, because we would have joint meetings and it wasn't agreed upon as to what a quorum meant. So I believe, now Matthew, I'm looking at you because you might have been the chair at the time of rules, but we specified a quorum needs to exist for each,
Committee.
where before that was never clear. So when highway would be there with votes going a certain way and public grounds be there votes going a different way and you didn't have a quorum of one or the other, then there was a question. So we clarified that through the rules. You clarified that through the Rules Committee by requiring a quorum of both.
Very good. I enjoyed the presentation, very thorough, so thank you for your answer.
Okay, Supervisor Schwallenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Joe. Even though we've been around a long time, it's always good to be re-educated. This is from a personal standpoint. I found out when I was a new supervisor, I attended a committee meeting that I was not a member of because there was something on the agenda that I was interested in. There also happened to be a closed session, and I got up to leave. And I was told, excuse me, that because I was a supervisor, I was entitled to stay for the closed session, even though I was not on that committee. So hopefully that's right still. You know, so you did say elected officials, and I wasn't quite sure if that came across. The other thing is with my two committees that I chair, and my department heads are very good about it. They call me a week before our meeting to go over the agenda with me about what they want on and if I want anything else put on. And then we try to post as soon as possible before to give everybody a chance to look over the agenda and know when the meeting is. So, thank you.
Okay, there are no other questions, so, and thank you for that. All right, moving on to our agenda, we have to amend the rules of order to allow the July County Board meeting to be held on July 23rd at 6 p.m. It would be the fourth Tuesday. Normally, we meet the third Tuesday. So I have a motion by Supervisor Diedrich and a second by Supervisor Booty to amend the rules of order. Is there any discussion on that? Supervisor Halshu.
No.
Okay, no, I'm not. Thank you very much. I was just wondering, is there a specific reason we're doing this? Because I have my calendar and I've made plans for vacations and other things because we didn't have a meeting on the special time. And I'm just wondering what the reason was we're trying to do this.
Do you want to handle it or not? I have asked for this change because I'm a board of directors for the County Mutual Insurance Corporation, as is Supervisor Schwallenberg, and we will be in Colorado that week. And there are two specific items that will be in July, namely the Children's with Disability budget and a park resolution that we would both like to be here to vote on. So that's the reason. Supervisor Booty, did you have a question? Okay. So that's the reason why, so.
Thank you. I have another question. Couldn't the vice chair be in charge?
He could.
Okay, just wondering if that was a possibility. Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, please vote your ballot. Ballots. We have Supervisor Latour, thank you. We have 16 yes, 3 no, 0 abstain, 2 absent, so it has passed by a 2/3 vote, and I thank you for that. Moving on to resolutions, Resolution 2024-06.
Resolution authorizing Calumet County to enter into the settlement agreement with the KROGER Company and agree to the terms of Addendum 2 to the MOU allocating settlement proceeds, introduced by Supervisors Steer and Schwallenberg.
All right, I have a motion by Supervisor Booty and a motion by Supervisor Miller, and Kimberly will address this resolution.
Thank you. Thank you. This is just another settlement for the opioid resolution. This is a KROGER settlement, and we do not have an amount yet. It's the payments in total will be 1.2 billion, but we don't have the amounts as to each subdivision. They did not have that at the time that this went through, but they are asking us to sign the MOU, which is what we've done for every opioid settlement that we've done, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. And they indicate that the disbursement should be yet this year, 2024, and the payments will be for 11 years.
And Kimberly, for the new supervisors, would you just kind of explain what happened, why we have this coming?
Sure. So the opioid lawsuit was basically a bunch of entities got together, not just in Wisconsin, but all over the country. And we signed on with a bunch of other counties, as well as, I think, the state, and a couple of cities, although some counties decided not to participate and joined on their own. Milwaukee was one of them, and there's another entity that's on their own. Basically indicating that there were pharmaceutical companies, there were distributors, there were manufacturers that oversold, overproduced, overmanufactured opioids, which created addictions and habit forming, so that people were dying. And so this group, these attorneys got together, we hired these attorneys, we signed agreements to have these attorneys represent us. They sued a number of people, distributors, manufacturers, et cetera, and these people started settling. So there was a group of manufacturers that settled. Johnson & Johnson was one of them. Shopko, Walmart, 3 distributors, now KROGER. There was a family. Why can't I think of the name? They were big. they resolved. So as these are resolving, we have to sign MOUs, which basically say we're not going to sue them independently, that we're agreeing to the settlement, and that we understand this is what we are agreeing to, and that we are agreeing to pay the attorneys. So that is what's before you now.
Are there any questions? Supervisor Tunis.
I have one question. Since I haven't been part of this, I don't really understand it, but I was reading over the whereas, and there was one that talked about, it was on, I think, the second page, something about, is this going to cost us, it's not going to be enough to pay the attorney fees?
No, we don't pay anything on this.
Because that's what one of these said, whereas it is anticipated the amount of any award from the free fund established, I've got a thing on here, settlement agreements will be insufficient to satisfy the county's obligations under the engagement agreement with the law firm.
Yeah, the fee fund is the fund that they put together just to pay for the attorneys. So the fee fund is not going to be enough. However, the amount of the settlement will be enough to cover them. So we have an agreement of how much we're getting, and out of that, they are going to take their cut. So we just get less than what we are awarded. We have to pay them from our award, but we aren't going to owe them anything, that's for sure. We're going to be getting money,
Okay, I just wanted to
if
clarify
that makes sense.
Thank you.
Supervisor Lochran?
Yes, just wondering if these numbers are close to, or how they relate to the other ones that I've signed already.
It's going to be very similar. But when we asked for the actual numbers, they were only able to give us percentages. So to me, that doesn't tell me anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, if there are no other questions, we are voting on a resolution authorizing Calumet County to enter into the settlement agreement with the KROGER Company and agree to the terms of Addendum 2 of the MOU allocating settlement proceeds. Please vote your ballot. And we have 19 yes, 0 nays, 0 abstain, and 2 absent, so that resolution has been adopted. Moving on to ordinance 2024-03.
Ordinance to amend Chapter 82 zoning code on certain property in the town of Woodville, property of Joseph CAMPSHURE, introduced by the Planning, Zoning, and Farmland Preservation Committee.
All right, I have a motion by Supervisor Booty and a second by Supervisor Elliott. And Supervisor Hufsberger, would you speak to this ordinance, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Joel CAMPSHURE and agent Brad Beekle are requesting to rezone approximately 2.58 acres from exclusive agricultural, EA, to agricultural residential, and approximately 11.75 acres from EA, exclusive agricultural preservation, in the town of Woodville. The rezone will split the existing structures on the property from farmland for the conversion to a non-farm residence.
Are there any questions regarding this ordinance? Seeing none, please vote your ballot. Oh, excuse me, Supervisor Schwab. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like things even, so I'm looking at these two attachments. On attachment 1, the red is not squared off.
I don't have the attachment in front of me,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
right here. And then look at the second one,
As
yeah.
you look at that, if you may not have this, but there is
There's one below it, the attachment B, which is squared.
there was two units, there still is 2 units. Chris, you can come up and talk a little deeper about it.
Interesting, very nice catch.
Yeah, attachment B, that is looking at really the subject area, that's all it is. There, like Mike was saying, there's multiple parcels that are involved in this particular property, which is more square in attachment B because that's the entire portion of it. The one when you're looking at in attachment A, so attachment A shows the reconfiguration of that with The yellow lines are the proposed lot lines, which are consistent with the ordinance requirements.
But it's not square.
What page is
Correct,
that?
it's not square, and it's not going to be square because it's.
It's part of the
meeting
resolution.
requirements of the ordinance, which means that we take as much as we possibly can with also preserving the agricultural land. So we're following the vegetative line as well as there's a septic system that's in there, which is why there's the angle on that. And then we squared it off further north because we have the ability to do that.
Okay. I think.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
I just like things even.
Yeah, exclusive ag, it's really based on the
It's hard to
acreage,
make
so
it
you're not
look-
able to take a large amount of acreage to square things off.
Well, and actually, it does make it more even. Your point is well taken. I mean, it does make it a more even chunk than it was before. Thank you, Chris.
All right, if there are any more questions, please vote your ballot. We have 19 yes, 0 nay, 0 absent, two absent, and it has been adopted by a majority vote. Supervisor reports within meetings of the last month. Anybody? I don't see any. Supervisor, I have no one.
It's white, I
It
know.
takes time. Supervisor
It'll
Booty's
get
up
there.
first.
Thank you. Just two items about Highway Committee. A few members of the Highway Committee had attended the Wisconsin County Highway Association Summer Road School from June 3rd through the 5th. There we received updates regarding the Work Zone Safety, Inclusion, and Drivers Education curriculum. This is an item that the Wisconsin County Highway Association and the Wisconsin Counties Association had lobbied for with the state of Wisconsin, and that was something that we had had as a success. We also had some sessions discussing traffic engineering at intersections to help improve safety, some new additives to asphalt pavement to help them perform longer. And then we received updates from the Wisconsin DOT regarding various programs, particularly the local road improvement programs. Then last week, the Highway Committee meeting had met, and we had approved 4 different town-county bridge culvert aid applications. These will be included in the proposed 2025 budget that you'll be seeing in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Booty. Supervisor Schwallenberg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Health and Human Services, our Director and Deputy Director refreshed the memory of some of the more senior members of the committee, or the board, excuse me, and explained to our new board members all the programs that we are mandated to do, which there are many of. If you're interested, and I hope you are, the annual report for Human Services is on the back table. Our staff spends a lot of time filling that out, and that will explain in concise terms all the programs that we do. Parks, the tree harvesting that has been going on for several years now in the park was being done on the northern end of the property on Ferry Springs Road. The logger was coming in that way, but could not complete the process because of the amount of rain that we have had. And so probably will not be able to come back until winter when it's frozen. Hopefully it's frozen. We've been waiting for things to freeze for years that they haven't been able to get into either. They apparently need to, if they can't buy a more expensive piece of equipment that, I'm assuming it's treads, I think, that they've asked that we may budget for part of. On the agenda, it was to allow UTVs to go into the park. The Commission has decided we will allow the UTVs and ATVs to go down to the harbor in County Park. They've been going down all these years for sturgeon fishing and everything, but they will not be allowed in the campgrounds. The only ATVs in the campgrounds belong to the park and to our camp hosts. And there have been violations of this too that have been happening. People have been going down to get ice cream with their ATVs that live in the neighboring neighborhoods. The wall of the Stockbridge Harbor that you okayed a resolution for the sidewalk a while ago has got more problems than we realized, and there needs to be some major refurbishing of that too, so we'll have to look at what the cost of that is. The bathroom on the southern end should be ready pretty soon, and our cabins, yoo-hoo! Tomorrow we'll have the, I can't think of the no, the inspectors. Inspectors are coming in or whatever to look at those. So hopefully they will be ready to rent. We have a new camera at Brothertown Harbor pretty soon, and this camera is going to rotate. We have one at County Park right now that just looks at the water, which they use again in the wintertime to see what the ice looks like, but this one will rotate. You should be able to go in through the county site, campground site, I think it's YouTube or whatever, and pick up where you can watch everything that's going on down there. We will be bringing a resolution that Chair Connors had spoke about next month for Ledgeview. We need to do some remodeling at Ledgeview. We have been working on that for several years, and it was a matter of priorities. The highway building needed to be done, and the jail, and now it's the park. If anybody is aware of Ledgeview, I would encourage you to go out and see. That was an open-air pavilion that was enclosed and attached to the rest of the building, and nothing seems to fit quite right. So the water comes in, and we have animals that have decided to make their homes in the walls and in the ceilings too. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you. It's enough.
Supervisor Deidre?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one thing I'd like to add to Supervisor Booty's comments about the DOT updating us on future projects. Those of you who represent or spend time in the southern part of this county will be happy to hear that the DOT has a roundabout plan for Irish Road and 151 by the Walmart, which has been needed for years. So that's in the planning stage. I don't know, 4 or 5 years out, but it's well deserved and well timed. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Steer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to add what Mary said. I posted the picture of the cabins on several sites, and it got very well received. A lot of thumbs up. So you guys might be fighting for a space to rent. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Steer. All right, moving on, the county administrator has several appointments. We have a reappointments to the Brillion, Chilton, the Holstein Library Boards, the Fox Valley Workforce Development Board, and the Zoning Board of Adjustments. There's several of them. Is there a motion to take them all at one time?
There we,
I have a motion by Supervisor Steer. Second. A second by Supervisor Schwallenberg. You have them all in front of you. Is there any objection to any of those being appointed or reappointed? Fine, then we'll take them all at one time, so please vote your ballot. We have 19 yes, 0 nay, 2 absent, so that has been adopted. I just want to remind you that June 24th at 10 o'clock will be our strategic planning meeting. We will feed you. I would hope that you all attend. It's pretty much mandatory. And
Could I
so,
know if people know that they cannot make it?
if you cannot make
You
it, please
cannot
let
make
us
it?
know. So Matthew, you cannot make it. Andy? Brian? Anyone else? All right. We'll see you on that Monday. 10 o'clock, June 24th. So we have completed all the agenda items.
Did Ron have something?
Supervisor Diedrich?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to know if anyone has questions on the county administrator's report.
Oh, well, it was kind of all a part of the appointment. Any questions on the administrator's report? Fine, thank you. So completing all the agenda items, I will adjourn this meeting and we'll see you on Monday. Thank you for your attendance. Drive safely home.